Welcome to The Outcast, a science fiction novel, written by Sven Torkelson. Narrated by Alexander Atkins. Copyright 2023 by morrisbookshop.com and Shadowplay Communications Publishing. Audiobook performance. Copyright 2023 by morrisbookshop.com. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without written permission from the publisher or author, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. Special bonus offer. Visit morrisbookshop.com for a very special bonus offer and to be notified when new books come online. Again, that website is morrisbookshop.com. Chapter 1. The air in the cheapest flophouse of the city was thick with the stench of harsh antiseptic and unwashed bodies. The early Stantmas snowstorm had driven in every beggar who could scrape together the price of admission, and the long rows of cots were filled with fully clothed figures. Those who could afford the extra dime were huddled under thin, grimy blankets. Dr. Samuel Miley, now a pariah, lay on a bare cot, tossing and turning fitfully. His once handsome face was covered in black stubble, and his tall, thin body was awkwardly curled up in a vain effort to conserve heat. His clothes, which had once been expensive, were now wrinkled and covered in grime that no amount of cleaning could remove. Suddenly, he jerked upright with a protest forming on his lips. The ugly surroundings registered on his eyes, and he stared suspiciously at the other cots. But there was no sign that anyone had been trying to rob him of his possessions. He relaxed back onto the couch when a sound caught his attention, even over the snoring of the others. It was a low wail, the sound of a man who can no longer control himself. Miley swung to the cot on his left as the moan hacked off. The man there was well-fed and clean-shaven, but his face was grey with sickness. He was writhing and clutching his stomach, arching his back against the misery inside him. "Space stomach?" Miley diagnosed. He had no need of the weak nod in response. He'd treated such cases several times in the past. The disease was usually caused by the absence of gravity out in space, but it could be brought on later from the abuse of weakened internal organs, such as the intake of too much bad liquor. The man must have been frequenting the wrong spacefront bars. Now he was obviously dying. Violent peristaltic contractions seemed to be tearing the intestines out of him, and the paroxysms were coming faster. His eyes darted to Miley's tobacco sack, and there was animal appeal in them. Miley hesitated, then reluctantly rolled a smoke. He held the cigarette while the spaceman took a long, gasping drag on it. He smoked the remainder himself, letting the harsh tobacco burn against his lungs and sicken his empty stomach. Then he shrugged and threaded his way through the narrow aisles toward the attendant. "Better get a doctor," he said bitterly, when the young punk looked up at him. "You've got a man dying of space stomach on 214. The sneer on the kid's face deepened. "Yeah? We don't pay for doctors every time some wino wants to throw up. Forget it and get back where you belong, Bo." "You'll have a corpse on your hands in an hour," Miley insisted. "I know space stomach, damn it." The kid turned back to his lottery sheet. "Please leave if you want to play doctor. Go on, get out of here before I throw you out in the snow." One of Miley's hands reached out to the attendant, but he stopped himself. He turned back to face the young man. "I'm serious. I used to be a doctor," he declared. "My name is Samuel Miley." The attendant didn't pay much attention until Miley's words registered. He looked up and studied Miley with surprise and contempt, then grabbed the phone. "Give me the medical directory," he muttered. Miley felt the young man's eyes on him as he stumbled back to his cot. He slumped down and rolled a cigarette with shaking hands. The sick man was getting worse, moaning and whimpering in fear. The other men were watching but didn't offer to help. It wasn't too late to save the sick man. Miley knew that hot water and skilled massage could stop the paroxysms. He stood up, ready to help, but then stopped himself. If he saved the man, he could end up in the gas chamber. There was no mercy for a pariah who broke the lobby laws. If the spaceman survived, Miley might only get a flogging, but he knew his luck was bad. There could be a heart attack, and the papers would have a juicy story. Idealism was a word the medical lobby used a lot, but it wasn't for Miley. A pariah had no business thinking of others. As Miley sat there, the sick man grew quieter. Sometimes massage could help even at this stage. It was harder without hot water, but massage was the most important treatment. Miley's trembling hands stopped him. He no longer had the strength or certainty to make the massage effective. He glared at his hands in disgust when the legal doctor arrived. The old man was tired, and Miley guessed he had been an idealist who had given up. He left things to the established procedures of the medical lobby. He looked defeated as he bent over the dying man. The doctor turned to the attendant. "It's too late. I can only ease his pain. The call should have been made half an hour ago." He had never handled space stomach before. He gave the sick man a hypo that probably contained Narcanol. Miley watched, feeling sympathy for the shock the man would feel. At least it would shorten his suffering. The final seizure lasted only a minute or so. "It's hopeless," the doctor said. He frowned and then shrugged. "I'll fill out a death certificate. Does anyone here know his name?" The doctor's eyes landed on Miley, and he frowned. A twisted smile curved his lips. "Miley, isn't it? You still look like your pictures." "Do you know the deceased?" Miley shook his head bitterly. "No idea. I don't even know why he wasn't blue at the end, if it was space stomach. Do you, Doc?" The old man threw a startled glance at the corpse. Then he shrugged and nodded to the attendant. "Well, go through his things. If he still has a space ticket, I can get his name from that." The kid started rummaging through the bag that had fallen from the cot. He pulled out a pair of shoes, half a bottle of cheap rum, a wallet, and a bronze space ticket. He wasn't quick enough with the wallet, and the doctor took it from him. "Medical lobby authorization. If he has any money, it covers my fee, and the rest goes to his own lobby." There were several bills, all of large denominations. He turned the ticket over and began filling in the death certificate. Arthur Billings, space lobby, crewman, cause of death, idiopathic gastroenteritis and delirium tremens. There had been no evidence of delirium tremens, but apparently the doctor felt he had scored a point. He tossed the space ticket toward the shoes, closed his bag, and prepared to leave. "Hey, Doc!" The attendant's voice was indignant. "Hey, what about my reporting fee?" The doctor stopped. He glanced at the kid, then toward Miley, his face a mixture of speculation and dislike. He took a dollar bill from the wallet. "That's right," he admitted. "The fee for reporting a solvent case. Medical lobby rules apply, even to a man who breaks them." The kid's hand was out, but the doctor dropped the dollar onto Miley's cot. "There's your fee, pariah." He left, forcing the protesting attendant to precede him. Miley reached for the bill. It was blood money for letting a man die, but it meant cigarettes and food, or shelter for another night, if he could get a mission meal. He no longer could afford pride. Grimly, he pocketed the bill, staring at the face of the dead man. It looked back sightlessly, now showing a faint speckling of tiny dots. They caught Miley's eyes, and he bent closer. There should be no black dots on the skin of a man who died of space stomach, and there should have been cyanosis. He swore and bent down to find the wrecks of his shoes. He couldn't worry about anything now but getting away from here before the attendant made trouble. His eyes rested on the shoes of the dead man, sturdy boots that would last for another year. They could do the corpse no good. Someone else would steal them if he didn't. But he hesitated, cursing himself. The right boot fitted better than he could have expected, but something got in the way as he tried to put the left one on. His fingers found the bronze ticket. He turned it over, considering it. He wasn't ready to fraud his identity for what he'd heard of life on the spaceships yet. But he shoved it into his pocket and finished lacing the boots. Outside, the snow was still falling, but it had turned to slush, and the sidewalk was soggy underfoot. There was going to be no work shoveling snow, he realized. The material of the suit coat was no match for the harshness of the weather. Miley pulled it up, feeling the bite of the cold. However, his boots were a different story. If he had socks, they would have been completely comfortable. As he passed a cheap restaurant, the smell of the synthetic food made his stomach churn. It had been 2 days since he had a real meal, but he had to wait. There was a chance he could scavenge something edible this early in the day. He continued shuffling along. After a while, the cold bothered him less, and he passed through the hunger spell. He rolled another smoke and sucked at it, hardly thinking. It was better that way. It wasn't until much later that he noticed the big caduceus set into the sidewalk, which snapped him back to awareness of where he had wandered. He had travelled much too far uptown, following old habits. This was the medical lobby building, where he had spent more than enough time, including 3 weeks in custody before they stripped him of all rank and status. He stared at the ornate entrance where he had first emerged as a pariah. He had meant to walk down those steps as if he were still a man, but each step drained his resolution until he finally covered his face and slunk off, knowing himself for what the world had branded him. He stood there now, staring at the smug young medical politicians and the tired old general practitioners filing in and out. One of the latter halted, fumbled in his pocket, and drew out a quarter. "Merry Stantmas," he said dully. Miley fingered the coin. Then he saw a grey medical policeman watching him, and he knew it was time to move on. Sooner or later, someone would recognize him here. He clutched the quarter and turned to look for a coffee shop that sold the synthetics to which his metabolism had been switched. No shop would serve him here, but he could buy coffee and a piece of cake to take out. A flurry of motion registered from the corner of his eye, and he glanced back. "Taxi! Taxi!" The girl rushing down the steps had a clear soprano voice, cultured and commanding. The grey medical uniform seemed moulded to her shapely figure, and her red hair glistened in the lights of the street. Her snub nose and determined mouth weren't the current fashion, but nobody stopped to think of fashions when they saw her. She didn't have to be the daughter of the president of medical lobby to rule. It was Stan Miley once, and now Stan Tanana again. Miley swung toward a cab. For a moment his attitude was automatic and assured, and the cab stopped before the driver noticed his clothes. He picked up the bag Stan dropped and swung it onto the front seat. She was fumbling in her change purse as he turned back to shut the door. "Thank you, my good man," she said. She could be gracious, even to a pariah, when his homage suited her. She dropped 2 quarters into his hand, raising her eyes. Recognition flowed into them, followed by icy shock. She yanked the cab door shut and shouted something to the driver. The cab surged forward, leaving Miley in a spray of slush and mud. He glanced at the coins in his hand and cursed his luck. Without a second thought, he crossed the street, ignoring the screeching brakes and blaring horns. He stole a glance back at the glowing sign atop the building. "Your health is our business." But as he continued on, the symbol of the health industry faded into the distance. Miley stumbled forward, puffing on a cigarette and clutching the bronze badge of the deceased. His stolen boots trudged through the melting snow as he made his way through the protectorate of Earth on Stantmas, year 2100.